let me say a word about story structure and about what makes good stories. These are Bruce's rules about what and things. I think I'm right, but you can discard them if you feel like rules are not Catherine's or Sherry's or Heather's rules. First is Catherine told a wonderful story last time. It is still with me, right? And it worked so well because it used the classical story structure. There was a heroine. She had a problem. She had that problem, went to hell, and then it went to hell a second time until she started to work her way back up, and she got friends, and they started to work. So it was a really great classic story structure. We are somehow really wired for that structure. Mm. It doesn't matter kind of how many times we hear it, it's going to activate those synapses in our brain. And I don't remember stories very well or long stories very well, but Catherine's story is still with me. It's still run over in my head. So that's, I think, one thing we can think about, that classic kind of, I think of it as the Arnold Schwarzenegger story, right? The great big hero, but someone comes and they kidnap his kid and he can't get him and he can't get down the mountain to get him. And it just goes on and on and on, and he's just in the biggest hole you can never get out of, and then he slowly works his way back out. Somehow.
I'll be back.
I think.
Not a tumor.
And the second thing is character and the interaction of characters. And I think you saw that in the last story. As these characters become more real and more real, they have real emotions, they have real problems, things, it becomes much more compelling. And I think I really think I think very strongly that all real stories come out of character first. So I find that's the second thing that's very compelling. So that's where I'd like to see us go in this next one, is continue to work. You've already started working on it. Continue working with characters and try to let as much that narrative structure to emerge from the characters, what the characters need. And we've seen that. If you think of our first two stories, there's already been a good arc there toward more character. And then you have comments you want to share before we go? We have only 10 minutes left, though. So
Stephen King says the same thing, Bruce. I don't know if you've read his book. Have you read Stephen King's book On Writing? The title is On Writing. It's a fabulous book, and it's a look at how he became the writer. But he absolutely, that is his thing, that character drives the story.
It should. I think the great stories, the character needs to drive the story.
Yeah. Okay. Person answering a personal
ad.
Would you like a second prompt for a second character?
Oh, cool. Yeah. The last person anyone would expect.
Well, those two fit together.
Yeah.
What was the second card?
The last person anyone would expect. Who would like?
I'll start.
Okay.
Charles, his friends called him Chuck, never, ever imagined he would be in a situation where he couldn't make a romantic contact because he was a charmer. And he had in his 33-year-old life, he had many, many charming experiences, some pretty short, others, moderately long. But there he was in New York City, and the mayor and the governor and sometimes even the president was saying, don't leave your apartment. So Chuck had to
find a way to let the woman of his dreams know where he was. Now, fortunately, internet was a great, great way to reach people. But he did not immediately want the woman of his dreams to be drawn to him because he was devastatingly handsome. So he decided to disguise himself to see whether or not an astute woman would be able to see Chuck the Charmer beneath his disguise. And so his first step was to
look into his closet where he kept all of the material that he used when he was a theater student in undergrad. He had many costumes that he had kept, as well as material that made scars on your face. And he had hair for a mustache, and also had something that could make you look like you had lost parts of your hair. So he decided to use all of the materials at his disposal, even with the risk of going overboard. He started by putting the scar material across his face and creating a puckered scar. He then moved on to a mustache, one era 1970s. And then he removed, with other material, half of the hair on his head. He was pleased with the way that he looked. He thought that a woman that could love him in that state would surely be his soulmate. He decided that he was ready to get on the internet. He had not ever used that method before. He had heard stories about it, though. One of his friends had a really interesting experience, which he did not want to replicate. It was
Chuck's friend had accepted a date from a personal ad online, and when the friend went to meet the woman, well, when things got intimate, turned out it was not a woman. And that just wasn't going to work for Chuck. He definitely preferred the ladies. And he'd never had anybody really love him. I mean, he was a good looking, good in bed kind of man. And he was looking for something deeper finally. In his get up, he looked at that computer screen and he saw an ad for a woman that said,
unmute.
Homely woman seeking homely man for a home. Well, that seemed promising. And so he clicked. And when the picture of this homely woman came to life on the screen, his heart stopped. He couldn't believe how
familiar those eyes looked. Now, this woman on the screen was definitely the homeliest person that he had ever seen. But there was something about her eyes. Something about her eyes that made him think that he actually knew her. He looked very closely as they began to, just kind of chit-chat and get to know each other a little bit and express what they were looking for in a personal's ad. And he began to notice that her demeanor and her look in some way mirrored his own. Shall we say it looked a bit theatrical? And the deeper he sunk into the computer and the more he looked into the eyes, he realized that they reminded him of his very first love. Could this be her? Could this be April, that freshman in college sweetheart long, long ago? She was a theater major. So he decided, and he said,
I think we should spend some time together. Let's see, because of the pandemic, our choices of how we meet are kind of slim. But how about if we go to the park and I stand on one side of the pond and you stand on the other side, and then I'm going to lean over and wash my face. Will you do the same? And she said,
You are a very interesting person, Chuck. I like that about you. That was the last thing I expected you to ask me. And I'm intrigued. I love being taken off guard. I will absolutely meet you at the park, and I will absolutely meet you at the pond. And I will wash my face in that pond water. When would you like to meet? And Chuck said, what you doing now? So they both made their way to the pond in the park. And when they arrived,
well, it was a beautiful day outside, and lots of people came out to get some fresh air and some exercise, and both of them were looking around at the various people there, but their eyes locked onto each other. And from across the pond, they gave each other a nod, stepped right to the edge, knelt down, both of them looking at each other, and scooped up water and splashed it on their face and looked at each other, and they saw
An old,
other way. You had it before.
right, other way.
yeah.
an old familiar smile. It brightened the pond like a bolt of light across the rippling water. As she lifted her face, she patted her cheeks, and the wrinkles under her eyes vanished. She pulled at her hair, and the gray wig fell, revealing that black shock of long wavy hair he so loved long ago. It didn't take him long before the scar was gone and the distance between them was gone, although they stopped 6 feet from each other and made plans to meet again.
Yay!
I am crying. I am crying. I have tears in my eyes.
What a good story.